My name is Councillor Fraser Massey and I am the Chair. I'd like to remind everyone present that the meeting is being recorded and will be uploaded onto the Council's website. Item 1, do we have any apologies for absence?
Yes, we do have apologies from our two co-opted members, Charles Clark and Jasdeep Singh Najjar.
Councillor Cottrell?
Chair, just to note that I'm subbing on behalf of Councillor James Howden.
Noted, thank you very much. Item 2, the minutes. Everyone should have a copy of them circulated. I move that the minutes of the Audit Committee held on the 11th of July 2024 be approved as a correct record. Does any member have any comments on the minutes before we approve them? No. Would someone like to second those minutes? Thank you, Councillor. Item 3, urgent items of business. I have not this evening agreed to any items of urgent business. Moving on to item 4, declarations of interest. Does anyone wish to declare a declaration of interest? No. Thank you very much. Just before we go into item 5, I am going to be moving around a little bit of agenda items this evening, just to make you aware. So we'll be going for item 5 next, then we'll go to 7, then 10, then back to the running order at 6. But first is item 5. It's the BDO Progress Report and Statement of Accounts and Audit for 2020/21 to 2022/2023. Can I please ask Caroline May to present this item, please?
Thank you. This report is giving an update on the Statement of Accounts and Audit for the years 2021 to 22/23, to give an update on the recent Ministry of Housing, Communities and Local Government proposals for amending the accounts and audit regulations to clear the backlog of audits and to put the system on a sustainable footing. There's been a proposed backstop date announced, which is the 13th of December for those years, to have the accounts finalised and published. So the report is to talk about the Council's approach and to report to committee on where we are in terms of meeting the backstop date. At the present time, the external audits for the financial years 2021 and 2022 have not yet commenced. The audit backstop date statement was released on the 30th of July 2024 and the legislation was laid in Parliament on the 9th of September. The BDO report that was attached to my report as an appendix gives more detail from a BDO perspective on the audit update and timeline. So from a council perspective, the council has published the 2021 draft accounts, although the audit remains uncompleted and outstanding, and council officers are working to finalise the 2021 accounts and publish the remaining outstanding years. There will be a need for concurrent inspection periods for the public inspection of 6 weeks during the period running up until the 13th of December. There has been, the Public Sector Audit Appointments Limited have set scale fees during the time as well, taking into account the additional work that this places on audits, and obviously the additional time that officers will have to spend on the accounts is being acknowledged in terms of our officer planning to meet the backstop date. We are expecting for the year 2021 a qualified opinion. This is related to the investment balances and the categorisation of the value and the valuations. And that is because of the absence of a full valuation for particularly the solar farm investment supporting the 2021 statement of the accounts. We're expecting that to lead to a form of qualified opinion. For the subsequent years, we are expecting a disclaimed opinion, in terms of there won't be sufficient time to do a full audit. Obviously, coming up to the 13th of December, there's only a matter of weeks, and so there won't be that sufficient time to do otherwise than to disclaim the accounts. So there won't be that time to really determine whether the financial statements present a true and fair view, although the auditors do plan to do some scoping and planning work and the value for money work, which is still required. The value for money update, there was a significant weakness in arrangements that was previously reported in September 23, which is in connection with the 2021 and 22-23 Chief Internal Auditor opinion. And there is an objection to the 2021 accounts, which was made by the member of the public, which remains outstanding, and that will need to be concluded before 2021 or the subsequent audits can be signed. At this point, I will just mention briefly 23-24 in terms of the situation. We will be moving to Ernst & Young for that year, and the backstop date for that is 28th of February, but I will be bringing that back to future audit committee in terms of updates on that. So at this point, I will hand over to Rachel from BDO to present her report. Thank you.
Thanks, Caroline. So the report that you've got in front of you, essentially the first page sets out the executive summary, which is the purpose of the report, and that is to take you through the progress of the 2021 audit progress and our plans for 21-22 and 22-23, as Caroline just set out. I'll also give an update on where we are in terms of our value for money work, and there is also an outline timetable included, so you can get a sense of what we're doing over the next couple of months to try and get the audit concluded by that 13th of December date. So on the 2021 audit summary slide, next one, thank you. The audit progress, we have made really good audit progress on our areas of the financial statements that are not related to investments testing, so that work is really well progressed. It's going through our internal review procedures currently, and we do have the financial statements with the adjustments in that are being proposed in terms of heritage assets, intangible assets, and the investments. So we're working through those, so that is well progressed. In terms of the objection, we do have an objection to the financial statements, and that is in relation to borrowing to invest and classification and valuation of investments, so heavily linked into the investments work that we are doing for the financial statements. However, I won't be able to conclude on the financial statements until that objection is decided, so we are continuing to work through that with our forensics colleagues and taking support as we need that as well. In terms of the investments work itself, again, we are progressing with that. It has progressed a lot since the last time I spoke to you, and we are now in a position where we believe that we will be having to modify the opinion on the financial statements in relation to those investment balances. That is mostly in relation to classification of those investments. So there are occasions, some of these investments are quite complex and have complex structures, and we need to go and get the information not only for the kind of top structure of the organisation, but the organisations that sit behind that. So we need to follow the funds all the way through to be able to understand the investment and be able to classify it correctly. And we have been unable to get that information in a number of cases, so we won't be able to conclude on classification. As Caroline also set out, we have some potential issues around valuation as well, as we don't have valuations for example, the solar farm assets for the year that we are auditing. So there will be likely to be a material uncertainty there in terms of me being able to say that those values are materially correct, because obviously the sale date that's being used is not at the point of the time of these financial statements, so there's a difference in time in there. Also, where we've been unable to classify the investments, we can't then value them correctly either, because the valuation methods very much depends on how they're classified, so that kind of links through. So there will be a qualification in relation to the investments balances. We are still working through to conclude what that looks like and what impact that has. So ISO 700 is the standard that we use to draft opinions, and that has some set details in terms of what will be included in those. I will need to go away once we've concluded the work and consider the impact on the financial statements and what sort of modification to that opinion I will be making. But that opinion will have a level of detail in it in terms of what the issues are, so that the users of financial statements can understand which balances in particular are affected by the qualification. However, as a committee, you will also get our audit completion report, which will have a far more detailed level of our findings in it, so you'll be able to understand what the issues are. So on the next slide, there's some information about what we propose to do for the 2021-22 and 2022-23 audits. These are the audits that will be impacted by the backstop arrangements. The audit and accounts regs came into force actually on Monday, so that's now gone through. So we know that that's going to happen, and the code, which is our kind of guidance, is expected to come into effect in mid-November. So as Caroline said, the council will need to produce their accounts for 21-22 and 22-23, publish those accounts and have a public inspection period. And we'll also need to finish the 2021 audit before we can do these audits. So there is quite a lot in terms of a trail of events that need to happen before we get to these. But our plan is to disclaim them in line with those backstop arrangements. The next slide is around value for money arrangements. So again, in the backstop arrangement, in order to get through the backlog, there has been a change in terms of the scope of the value for money work that we need to do, which is included in that guidance. So we will reduce, the scope will be reducing down to 2 of our criteria. Work on the value for money for all 3 years is very well progressed. And as such, we will be able to issue a combined report in terms of the value for money arrangements for those outstanding years. As Caroline said, I have already reported a significant weakness in terms of arrangements in September 23 in relation to the internal audit work. Again, the value for money work will be linked into the findings on the objection as well. So if there's anything that is that comes out of that objection, anything that needs to be considered, that will also impact the value for money work as well. So it's all kind of tied in together, the 3 things, so they all need to happen at the same time. So the rest of the report just sets out the timetable, which I wasn't proposing to go through in any detail, but just to assure you that we are working with the council's finance team to progress things as quickly as possible, and trying to come to conclusions now where we think that we are not going to get any further information and drawing things to a close. As you set out, there's quite a lot that needs to happen over the next few months, but we are working together to make sure that that happens as quickly as possible. So that's all that I was proposing to say, and happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much, both of you, for the report and also the presentation. Thank you very much. Opening up to members of the committee. Councillor Anderson, straight off the bat.
So you mentioned that for one or more of our financial statements, we've been unable to classify some of the investments. You've gone out, you've tried to acquire some information that you've not been able to get hold of. Why is that? Is that sort of investments with companies that no longer exist now, have folded? Why haven't we been able to acquire that information?
A lot of these investments have structures, complex structures, so the investment will be in one organisation and then they'll have subsidiaries and different companies that their funds flow through to. And in order to classify them, we need to understand like the whole picture through to where the funds go and how the council gets the funds from those investments. And because of the passage of time, the council not having that information to hand, we can't get further but beyond that kind of high level, first level company, so we can't make the conclusion as to whether the classification is correct.
And so that's what your sort of, did you call it qualified opinion For those statements, you will provide a qualified opinion that says, you know, we've been unable to classify X investment because of Y, etc., etc. Yeah. Okay.
Yes, that's correct. Yeah.
Just on the back of that, when it comes to the qualified opinion, is it literally just the investments that the qualified opinion is going to apply to, or is there more?
So at this stage, it is just the investments. We do still have some work that we are finalising around property, plant and equipment valuations. We are still trying to get the information for that, but if we are in the same position where, because of the passage of time, because of staff, moving on, if we can't get that information as well, that also may lead to a potential qualification, but we're not at a point where we've concluded on that yet. But everything else should be fine. There should be no other areas.
Thank you for that. Any other members' questions? I've got a few, but yeah, Councillor Hurrell.
Excuse me. Evening. Thanks for your report. It says that the new backlog statement is due to be the date is the 13th of December. Do you think you're on target for them dates? Is there any reason why they may be delayed?
So we are very much working towards that date. I think it's in everybody's best interest now to get these concluded as quickly as possible, so the council can move on, work with your new auditors and get to that position of assurance again for the year that you're in. But there is a lot that needs to happen. There is a lot of different kind of moving pieces to this. So I wouldn't want to sit here and give you the assurance that will definitely be achievable. But we are all working together to get as close as we can to that date.
Sorry, just off the back of that one again. So if we get to January the 2nd and worst case scenario, we've missed the date, what happens to the authority?
So there is provisions in the guidance around reasons that backstop date wouldn't apply, and actually having a material objection to the financial statements is one of them. In that case, there is some guidance there. I think my understanding is that you need to inform the Secretary of State that date won't be made and put a statement on your website saying why you haven't been able to make that date.
That leads really nice onto the objection, actually. I was going to ask about that. Could you give me a bit of a timeline about when the objection was first made and what how we've progressed to today?
So the objection was made during the inspection period for the 2021 accounts and came in the September of that year, so September 21. It is very heavily linked with the financial statements work in terms of classification and valuation. So we have done work in the background to answer the questions of the objection, but we've needed to get that information before we can also answer the objection as well. So it has been a case of waiting until we're now at this point where we can kind of continue with that objection. Now we know where we're getting to in terms of the financial statements evidence as well. Thank
you. Is it quite unusual for a local authority to have an objection against its set of accounts?
No, not unusual at all. I think generally, in my experience as an auditor, there are particular issues which members of the public, are interested in and raise objections, and it can just very much vary depending on, what is happening in the authority, what is happening kind of in the wider environment. But certainly at the bigger authorities, it is, I would expect to get one every year.
Okay, thank you. Any more questions? Any other member would like to ask questions? Just a reminder, I'm not going to the recommendation just yet, but just a reminder, we're being asked to note and comment on the position of the external audits of the council. I'm concerned that we're rolling a lot into a fair number of years, and we're rolling a lot around these investments in terms of it's all going to become not factual as such, and we're not going to have chance to. We could go for years, I suppose, and we still wouldn't have chance to get all of the facts, to get all of these, how we'd actually like them as members. But we have got this backstop date to work to. And I'm quite concerned that, yeah, it's going to take quite a lot, and lots of things are going to need to align to make sure we meet that. I suppose the other question I had was, let me just dig through my notes. So in terms of, just going back to the investments and the information or lack of information on those that Councillor Anderson raised, is this information that's not inside this authority, or is it third parties that we're not able to access and audit?
So it is information from third parties, but it is information that I would expect the council to have held to fully understand those investments for yourselves. So I think it's sort of essentially a bit of both, but it is information that we should have been able to ask the council for, and the council asked for if they didn't have it. But like I say, due to the passage of time now, we've just not been able to get back to that position.
Thank you for that. So essentially, I'm going to say our paper trail wasn't good enough in terms of we can't trace it back to the right places and regarding these investments. On the timeline, in October 24, which we're now in, at the bottom two on the presentation, it's engagement with renewables energy partner, engagement with valuation specialist. And because the timeline's so tight, is that already happening, or is that towards the end of October? Or when, because every week counts at the moment.
So we've been engaging with them over the last period anyway, so this is now kind of what we call like formal engagement and consultation with them. So that process has started, and we are starting to get the kind of responses back from them. It is, at this stage, those responses are to help me form my opinion. I don't think there's anything in there that's going to change the council's position, just because, as I say, we're kind of coming to the conclusion that we don't have the evidence to make those judgments.
Thank you. And forgive my ignorance on this. When the opinion comes out, how detailed will that be? Will it be a one-liner, or will it be pages of the reasons why you can't give a more qualified opinion?
So it will very much depend on the type of opinion that we end up concluding that we need to issue. But there will be enough detail in there that the readers of the accounts will be able to understand what balances are affected and how they are affected. It won't be pages and pages and pages, because that audit report is a summary of my work. But as a committee, you will get a more detailed findings report that has kind of all the nuts and bolts of those decisions in it, and that audit report will sort of be a summary of that will go into the financial statements and onto your website.
Again, thank you for that. Any other members or comments before we move to the recommendation on this? I mean, just summing up, it's not where any of us would like to be, I'm sure, as officers, members, and as the authority and residents, but we're working with what we've got, and we're working to quite a strict deadline that I really hope we can meet. So with that, the recommendation is that the Audit Committee notes and comments on the position of the outstanding external audits and the Council's statement of accounts covering 2020/21, 2021/22 and 2022/23. Have we all agreed that we've noted and commented the position? Great. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Thank you very much. You're welcome to stay, or you're free to leave. So before we go on, no problem. Thank you. Thank you, committee. As I mentioned earlier, we are going to be moving the items around a little bit this evening. We're going to go to item 7, which is page 63 of your reports pack. It is the Regulation of Investigatory Powers Act, RIPA, as it's known, Activity Report 2023/24. And can I please ask Michael Deneen to present this item, please?
Thank you very much, Chair, and to the committee. This is the annual report of RIPA activity for 23-24. It's worth noting the Council has low usage of RIPA legislation. However, it is still a requirement to have policies and procedures in place for its use whilst we have it at the local authority. I'm just going to guide you through some of the information within the report and then open it to questions to yourself, Chair, and then the committee. It's worth noting in January 2024, the Investigatory Powers Commissioner's Office reviewed our management and oversight of our activity, and they were satisfied with our procedures and did not set any revisits for this year, and actually only set our next inspection for 2027. You'll notice throughout the report there is only 3 RIPA applications utilised within Thurrock last year. This figure is low as officers utilise other legislation and investigative techniques to gain the evidence they require. There are also only 2 communication data requests sent to NAFN, who are the national gatekeepers for such applications for all local authorities. The last part of this paper brings into play the RIPA policy, which is reviewed annually. Only minor changes have been made to this policy this year, and they are not legislative, they're simply administrative. And these are such things as the authorising officers, known as AOs, and the senior responsible officer, known as the SRO. There isn't a lot to the paper, and I would at this point open it up to yourself, Chair, and the committee for any questions surrounding it.
Thank you very much for the report, and I'm sure everyone's over the weekend and last week taken the time to read the Regulatory Investigating Powers Act of 2000. It's got some really interesting points. I'm glad to hear there's not much changed in it because, yeah, it's quite a lengthy document anyway. Any members of the committee, any questions or comments on agenda item 7? Councillor Anson.
Just to say, I'm personally quite glad that you mentioned there were only 3 instances. Was it of covert surveillance being used? Is that what we're saying?
The applications are under the RIPA legislation, so they would be under the directed surveillance, yes.
Right, okay. So we had 3 this year. Do you foresee that rising next year or in the future? Because in my mind, it's quite a good thing that we only had 3.
It would be hard to give an indication whether it would be an increase or a decrease. However, what I would say is the process to actually have that authorised is a very stringent process. Authorising officers have to be completely satisfied that the legislation is being utilised appropriately and proportionately, and if they don't feel that, then they won't authorise it. So what I can say is that if we do utilise the legislation, it's been required and authorised by an appropriate officer.
And who are the authorising officers accountable to? You mentioned a senior authorising officer, didn't you? Is that the top layer of accountability, or is there a director? Or
no. Strangely, I know the wording could lead you there, Councillor. An AO, an authorising officer, holds complete responsibility for their own decision making, so they are held liable themselves. That's why they have extensive training around RIPA authorisation, and they will keep that authorisation, and that record will be kept so that if it is challenged, they will be able to remember their rationale, etc., and give a justification for it.
And from whom would a challenge usually come? Is it whoever the sort of RIPA has been used against? If they end up in court or whatever, is it them, or do we have like an internal audit process where we challenge the authorising officer's use of these mechanisms?
It may be of assistance if I come in there because it's more of a technical issue. So I think the process that is set out in the policy, which is typical of most authorities, actually has that internal rigour and checks and balances. The purpose of setting up of the way it works is the person applying for the covert surveillance takes that to an authorising officer, and then there is also the senior responsible officer also does a kind of informal check of that. But really importantly, and the change in law that's been in place for about the last decade or so, is that the authorisation has to be granted by a magistrate. So the decision is actually made externally. So any challenge would be to that. The purpose of RIPA was brought in following the Human Rights Act because of the balancing the interference that covert surveillance has on people's privacy, which is a protected right under the European Convention, with the need to, or the necessity of undertaking criminal investigations. And I think one thing that might help set members sort of the context for this is most local authorities, and I'm sure it's the case here, certainly the two applications that I've seen since I've been here, is it's used in the context of trading standards and usually for test purchases in premises, such as seeing whether alcohol will be sold to underage test purchasers, and they are usually observed by a trading standards officer who observes the transaction. So if alcohol is sold without a check to a 17-year-old, that they will then use that as evidence. But that process of observing the transaction is viewed as the covert surveillance, because the person selling the alcohol does not know that they are being observed in those circumstances. So it's that is usually when it's that type of scenario where we're undertaking our public protection and enforcement activities that we are using RIPA. And I mean, Mike may be able to endorse that because he's got a longer history here, but certainly from my experience in a number of other authorities, it tends to be within that context.
Thanks, Dan. I can confirm, as it notes in the paper, all of these were attributed to trading standards, and in general terms, I won't go into specifics, but they always generally include those test purchase operations that are held.
Yeah, I'll just finish up by saying that provides a lot of comfort, because obviously when I don't like the idea of people being covertly watched and listened to. So the fact it's just a few people making some test purchases probably throughout the year is good. But that's it.
Thank you, Councillor. I agree as well. It's good to see such a low number. In terms of other investigatory powers the council's got, how does this number of 3 compare to, say, is it 3 out of, and there's 500 other different means that we use, or other cases that have used different means, or is there any numbers on that?
All cases would be looking to gain their evidence, and it just so happens as time has progressed, there are other means now to gain that intelligence from different legislation, such as money laundering legislation, etc. You don't have to follow someone nowadays to figure out where they're spending their money. Their phone can tell you. So it's all of that, and that really changes the perspective of the requirement for that directed surveillance. But I haven't got the entire numbers that the legislation has been used against. I haven't got, unfortunately.
No, I appreciate it was a little bit out of the scope of the report. I thought I'd just ask the question. It never hurts to ask. I think it's really good that the IPC, the Investigatory Powers Commissioner's Office, has effectively given a clean bill of health, and I'm guessing there was no minor, anything problems found, because they've signed it off until 2027. So that's really pleasing to see. Any other members, comments or questions? Councillor Harrell.
Thank you. Thanks, Chair. Sorry. The RIPA numbers seem very low to me. The Chair and Councillor Anderson said they're pleased that the numbers are really low, but do you believe the numbers are actually accurate? Or do you think there's bound to be things that are being missed, obviously, but what's your opinion, please?
No, the data that's presented in the paper is categorically correct. We keep an exceptional record of all RIPAs that are authorised, and we also keep that register very much up to date. Hence the reason the inspector that came and inspected the records didn't find any serious concerns with any of it. In relation to it being low, as I say, there are other means to gain intelligence now. It's not necessarily directed surveillance that is required. It is a very resource-intensive piece of legislation.
I think the fact that it's got to be signed off by, was it a judge effectively as well?
Yes, it gets signed off judicial review by a magistrate.
So I suppose it's the type of powers you only use if you really have to. Would that be a good way of describing it?
Most definitely.
Any other members with comments or questions on this? We've got a few recommendations that I'll move to then. So the recommendations are: the Audit Committee note the statistical information relating to the use of the RIPA for the period of 1st of April 2023 to the 31st of March 2024. Do we all agree that we've noted that information? Any against? Second recommendation, that the Audit Committee agree to the RIPA policy in the appendix. Everyone agreed to that? Any against? No. And the Audit Committee note the findings of the RIPA inspection. We all agreed we've done that. We do. Brilliant. Thank you very much, Michael. Don't go anywhere just yet. Moving on to item 10, which is found on pages 203 of your agenda packs. Just give you a second to find that. This is the Counter-Fraud and Investigation Annual Report for 2023/24 and the Counter-Fraud Strategy for 2024 to 2027 and associated policies. Again, can I ask Michael Deneen to present this item, please?
Thank you very much, Chair. If I start with the annual report for the 2023-24 performance of the Counter-Fraud Investigation Team, I'm pleased to inform the committee that there has been an increase on performance from last year and the figures remain positive. Some of the largest increases of reporting have been within housing fraud, which has seen it rise from 52 referrals in 22-23 to 115 last year. Revenue fraud referrals up from 1 to 10 this year, and right to buy application referrals up from 7 to 33 in 23-24. The team have continued to complete these investigations, and through their investigative results, we saw the CFI make an increase of cost avoidance to departments within the council of nearly 2 million. In terms of the strategy, a new strategy is being brought forward for 2024 to 2027. And the strategy is quite standardised across the counter-fraud sector. This includes pillars, which are overseen by good governance and also allows us to prevent fraud against the council. There is no significant changes to many of the policies, but it does bring them all up to date, with amendments being made due to legislative changes around money laundering. Finally, you will see the new strategy has a 3-year work programme attached to it, ranging from education through to communication and development of the team. The progress of these work streams will be reported to committee throughout the 3-year strategy life cycle. And at this point, I think it's slightly easier to open to yourself, Chair, and the committee around any questions that they have around the report or any of the policies.
Thank you, Michael. I think this committee's been asking for some of this information for quite a long time. It's not that it's been delayed. I think it's just coming at the right time as we go through these different policies. I'll open it up to questions. Councillor Anderson.
You mentioned referrals had been up. It sounded like across the board, and you intimated that was a good thing. What do you attribute that to? I presume we don't have more resource on the previous year. Why are they up so much?
Thanks, Councillor. The team have very much been concentrating their efforts around education and communication with other teams across the council, as well as other areas that deal with members of the public out in our communities. And I feel it's that education and that engagement piece that has driven up referrals. It would be amiss of me to also mention that COVID did have a major effect on referrals as well. And we are still trying to recover from that, let's call it lack of engagement, because of we had to have that, to rebuilding that kind of engagement with our local communities. So I only foresee this increasing year on year, which is a good thing for the council, so that we can combat fraud where we see it.
Thank you, Councillor. Point 2.4 says that in 2023, the team changed its structure and become standalone and currently has 4 members of staff. How has that number changed over the last, say, 2 or 3 years prior to that?
Thank you, Chair. Quite significantly, but the way that we've split the resourcing is very different now. So a good 5 years ago, you would have found in excess of 5-6 investigators dealing with this. But now what we're doing is a much concerted effort targeting our community level enforcement. So you're looking at housing fraud, you're looking at SPD fraud, matters that really do affect the community and our residents. So the team has increased this year by 1 on last. So it was a good year the year before, 22-23. We saw an increase in the last quarter after we set out a new strategy and a new education programme. That has then progressed into this year, into 23-24, sorry. We've got an extra person this year, and we continue to see an increase in performance.
Thank you for that. So the monetary figures in 3.1 various where we've prevented the council from being frauded as such. Is that down to that number of teams? That seems that's pretty good value for money then, really, for the amount of resource in the team.
The team have worked very well, Councillor, and I think the engagement with other departments within the council and that education piece has played a huge part in that performance. I do have to stipulate that where we state we've made those savings, those cost avoidance, I don't want anyone believing that my team have brought in £2 million into the bank accounts. That's not how our counter fraud works, unfortunately. It very much avoids ongoing costs.
No, absolutely. I mean, if you could find £2 million, that'd be lovely. But yeah, it sounds like they're doing some really good work. Any other members with comments or questions for Councillor Cottrell?
Thank you, Chair. No, thank you, Mike, for the report. I know some of the great work your team do for my brief stint as a portfolio holder a number of months ago. So I think it's really fantastic work what you're doing. Just really going through onto the whistleblowing strategy. Previously, I know Thurrock's culture perhaps hasn't been that conducive. I know from previous times talking to officers a number of years ago who feel like they wanted to speak up on some issues that you never know, in hindsight, we kick ourselves now. But I think it's really important that we do actually make sure we're open with staff and actually start to adapt these policies. I know they're done yearly, but actually having something in place, feel a bit more concrete about it. So really it's more so just compliments to you and your team, but making sure we are there, and if things do get to a point where anyone is at risk, or if they think there's any criminality, they know there is these stringent policies in place to actually follow through and investigate.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor. And I think I'll take this opportunity to raise the fact that whistleblowing doesn't only have to be economic crime and fraud. I know I'm discussing that right now, but actually it's any activity that the council take part in. So I'd just like to keep that in everyone's mind as well. Thank you, Councillor.
Yeah, I thank you for that. I think it's important. It's not all money. There is sometimes safeguarding or other things where whistleblowing can be very important. How much has changed on the whistleblowing policy from what we had to what we've got tonight, roughly?
There's not huge amounts of change, Councillor. We've always had a whistleblowing policy. I think what is important is the culture that a whistleblowing policy promotes. And that is one that comes from the very top, from Dave Smith downwards. And I think everybody, especially, well, myself, I believe that culture has changed. And I think it's timely that we have reviewed and put in this new strategy and this new policy in play.
Thank you for that. Michael, any councillor comments and questions on this? Just before we go to the recommendations, we've got the proposed work plan for 24-25. Do you see that being completely achievable, or is there anything you feel that could be a bump in the road, so to speak?
No, what we've done this year, which is slightly different, I've associated the work plan to the 3-year strategy because of the resourcing levels of the team and the concentration I want them to be working on, which is the counter-fraud work. The strategy has a plan to continue with the communication, the education and the preventative matters. I foresee that all being completed on time because we are managing the expectations of the team.
No, it's good to hear. Councillor Coxwell said he's had some experience of the team. It sounds like they're doing some good work. If you could pass that on from the committee, please. Thanks for that.
Thank you, Chair.
Last call. If any members have any comments or questions on this item? No? Then we'll go to the recommendations as on page 204. 1.1, the committee examines the performance of the counter-fraud and investigation team 23-24 and accepts the proposed work plan for 24-25 Appendix 1. Are we all agreed? To the contrary? All agreed. 1.2, the committee approves the counter-fraud and investigation strategy 2024/2027 been adopted by the council. Appendix 2. All agreed? Any again? 1.3, the council approves the counter-fraud, bribery and corruption policy being adopted by the council. Appendix 3. Agreed. 1.4, the council approves the whistleblowing policy being adopted by the council. Appendix 4. All agreed. 1.5, the council approves the anti-money laundering policy being adopted by the council. Appendix 5. All agreed. All agreed. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Michael. Thank you. Thank you for your patience there. We're going to go back now to the original running order for the rest of the agenda. And that means the next item will be item 6, which is our risk management strategy. Can I please ask Frankie Smith to present this item, please?
Thank you, Chair, and good evening, members. So this is our new risk management strategy covering 2024 to 2027. This is a refresh of our risk management strategy following good practice and also actions from the best value inspection. The strategy has been approved by Cabinet. It went to Cabinet on the 11th of September. So it's coming to this committee for noting. We have prepared this in line with good practice, and it's similar to a model that has been adopted by Essex County Council. It's important, the strategy is important to enable us to fully embed risk management into all of our business as usual activity. The highlights to make members aware of is you'll note that there's no risk appetite being set within this risk management strategy. We need to do some work with stakeholders around that, so we're anticipating to modify the strategy in the coming months and bring back a refreshed version. There's also no opportunity risk currently included in the risk management strategy. There was stakeholders felt that it was too soon to have opportunity risk, but that's something we'll keep under review on an annual basis, and we'll revisit that in line following discussions with stakeholders. In terms of ongoing work to embed risk management, we're currently developing the corporate risk register, and that will be reported to Cabinet and Audit Committee in February. It's intended that risk management will be operating as business as usual by the 1st of April 2025, and that would include regular, probably quarterly reporting to Cabinet and Audit Committee. The risk management strategy sets out the role of Audit Committee in risk management. So Cabinet is to provide oversight over risk management, and the Audit Committee is to note the updates and reports on risk management. There is also an aspiration in the strategy that we've identified ourselves being risk aware in terms of our risk maturity, and we have set an ambition to move ourselves to risk managed within the next 18 months. The strategy includes an action plan with our priorities on how we're going to embed and further improve our risk management arrangements. And within that, that includes risk management training to all members, which I believe you've been invited to. And it also sets out the role of risk champions. So we're setting a suite of risk management champions across the council that will be responsible and accountable for embedding risk management within service areas. We've also recently implemented risk management implications into all decision papers, so you'll note that from committee papers and cabinet papers, and we're further embedding that. And also we've just recently procured a risk management system to enable better monitoring and reporting on our risks. And the next big step is for us to recruit to the risk management vacancies on a permanent basis. So that's the strategy presented to members, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much for your report, Frankie, and for the strategy coming forward to this committee this evening. I've got one quick question and I'll open it up to the committee. Well, more, whether it's a question or a statement, but no, there is a question. So I really like the idea of risk champions and people taking ownership and some responsibility for some of the things that will be coming forward. And I think this is a good framework that helps those champions actually know what those responsibilities are. I think it's really good that we're going through all of this, and because I sometimes feel like we've gone from one extreme to the other when it comes to risk as an authority, and now we've got to make sure that we do see an opportunity where there is, and that we can see the risk, but we also have mitigations for them, because it's all about how much risk you're comfortable in taking. I do worry sometimes we're not going to have that appetite for some time, but we do need to work towards it. Open up to any members. Councillor Anderson.
Obviously, the report sets out we've got 4 different risk registers: a corporate risk register, a departmental risk register, project. It strikes me there's a lot of registers, and then within each of those, you're going to have obviously quite a number of different risks. I'd have thought with different people assigned responsibility, etc. It's a lot of layers. How does the strategy allow for communication between layers? And I presume, you know, a risk that is judged, you know, as being a service risk or being on the service departmental risk register may at some point grow and end up on a directorate risk register. So how is the communication between all the different layers and the working between colleagues gonna work?
Thank you, Councillor. So we're currently developing the granular detail in terms of how that mechanism is going to work, but the risk champion network is going to be the task force to do that. So they'll be responsible for looking at all their risks within their areas, whether it be projects, service, directorate or corporate, and then there'll be an assessment and analysis to determine whether risks should or should not be escalated or in fact de-escalated, and then there'll be conversations with senior stakeholders in terms of where the risks are moved to. We want the risk champions to be positioned at heads of service level so that they've got the right profile and position in the council to make some of those decisions. So there will be they'll be responsible for monthly review of their risks and then determining whether the risks have increased or decreased and whether they need to be moved on or off the relevant risk registers. The implementation of JCAD will much improve our tracking and monitoring because whilst there'll be different risk registers, it will all be within the same system. So that person will have sight of all those risks for their area or those risks that are assigned to them, and it will make it a lot more streamlined. I think my understanding at the moment is there are lots of spreadsheets that lends itself to difficulties. So hopefully, I mean, at the moment we're focusing on the corporate risk register. The further risk registers will be developed over the next few months. What I would like to say is though those risk registers are organically growing. People are coming to us all the time to ask for risks to be added onto the risk register, and we're just determining where we think they sit and which level they sit.
Thank you very much for that. And just quickly, I think you briefly answered it there, but I was going to ask what sort of criteria were required for a colleague to be a risk champion. Did you say they've got to be heads of service, or can anyone in the council come forward and say, you know, I have a thing for risk, I'd like to be a risk champion?
So we've recently asked executive directors and directors to nominate colleagues to be risk champions. We think that the best position is at heads of service, but we also are aware that we have some risk management experts in the council already that are operating perhaps outside of heads of service level. So we'd be very open to talk to those colleagues as well. So we just think at heads of service level, they'll have the profile and also the opportunities at directorate management teams to talk about risk, but certainly we know that we've already got people working at a lower level with the aspiration and ambition and competence to take on the risk champion role. So ultimately it'll be up to the directors and executive directors to decide where that's best positioned.
Thank you, Councillor Anderson. There's some really interesting questions there. And about the escalation and de-escalation, I think that's really important as well, because if it doesn't go anywhere, it's not going to help anyone. It does need to go through the correct channels and levels. Any other members of comments for questions? We've been asked to note this. I think it's really good. I think we've got sensible timelines around this as well as being a managed risk by 2026 in April. I think it's sensible. I think it's going to take a while. There is a culture involved in this as well as a strategy. And members, I don't know if you agree, but personally, I think the culture is changing. So yes, I think that's really good to see. It's really good that there's lots of people coming forward in regards to taking up risk champions roles. I just like to sort of say if officers change, hopefully though, that doesn't get forgotten and put to the side, and that it's embedded into going forward into the roles. But I do think it's really important that it's across the authority and with senior and other officers. So that was good to hear. Before we go to the recommendations, then, is there any final questions or comments from members? I think this is risk management strategy for the next till 27 is actually a really good thing, some really sensible guidelines and time. So with that, the recommendations are 1.1, the Audit Committee notes the improvements proposed to the Council's risk management arrangements. Do we all note that? Agreed? Thank you. 1.2, that the Audit Committee notes the proposed risk management strategy 2024 to 2027. Are we all agreed on that? Agreed. Thank you, members. Next, we're going to go to item 8 on the agenda, which is on page 97 of your reports pack. This is the Annual Complaints and Inquiries Report 2023-2024. Can I invite Tracy Heiser to introduce the report, please?
Thank you, Chair. Hello, everyone. It's my first time presenting the Annual Complaints Report this evening, as the complaints team has recently moved under my operational area. So hopefully you'll all have read the report prior to the meeting, so I'll just summarise the key points and then open up for any questions. So the complaint reports run from pages 97 to 164 of your meeting pack, with Appendix 1 to 3 summarising the top complaint areas and themes. So the number of complaints received the reporting period is 1,940. It is an increase from 22-23, which was 1,717, which is a 13% increase, 223 additional complaints. The top 3 complaint areas remain the same as 22-23, and they are waste, repairs and tenancy management. And the highest volume services can all be seen at page 103 of your pack. Details of the top 10 complaint areas and the learning from complaints and ombudsman decisions are also all detailed within Appendix 1, with the highest complaint area overall being waste, which had 535 complaints, repairs 362, and estate management 122. And the top 10 themes can be seen on page 107 of the pack. Adult social care and children's social care complaints have separate statutory procedures, and these reports, just for your information, are shown in appendices 2 and 3, but these do go to separate committees. They go to health and wellbeing and also children's overview and scrutiny. So during the reporting period, 43% of complaints were actually upheld. The target is 38%. Obviously, the lower, the better. This is an improvement compared to 22-23, where 47% of the complaints were upheld. The highest area of upheld complaints was, again, waste, with 70% of their 535 complaints upheld. And details are provided in page 109 in Appendix 1 Trends page, which breaks those down a little bit more. So for the reporting period, 87% of complaints were responded to within time frame, and this is actually an improvement from last year, where 83% were responded to within time frame, but is still below the target of 90% within time frame. During the period, a total of 259 MP inquiries were received, and of those 88% were responded to within time frame, which again is an improved performance to last year's figures of 86%. However, it's still below the target of 90%. Subject very close to your heart, a total of 4,048 members' inquiries were received. 94% of those were responded to within time frame. Very similar for 22-23, 4,142, again with 94 responded to within time frame. And the average time taken to respond to a member's inquiry was 5 working days. The target is 90% responded within time. I attended Corporate Overview and Scrutiny Committee a couple of weeks ago, and shared with them I'm going to be doing some work on members' inquiries, and we are setting up a working group to review those processes. As I mentioned at the group, I think the processes are very outdated. It's not really working for members, so that's one of the first things that I want to tackle, and it closes tomorrow for nominations of people to attend the group, so really keen to get moving with that and start trying to improve that for you. I am being copied in on some issues that some of the councillors have flagged with me from Overview and Scrutiny, which is really useful, and we've also picked up some information from a previous group that looked at this. It was put on hold because of the overall contact management stuff. But yeah, so that's going to be really high on priority. Let's focus on the positives. So, as well as the complaints, the council also received 2,089 external compliments within the period, compared to 1,261 the previous year. And I'm very pleased to say that most of those were actually from the contact centre, which sits under my area, so that was really positive. There were 62 ombudsman decisions within the reporting period, and of the 62, there were 21 findings of fault. And in Appendix 1, there is a summary of those inquiries, and it's where the local government and social care ombudsman or the housing ombudsman have reached a final decision on the cases. So that's all summarised on pages 114 in Appendix 1. So I think really that sort of covers everything I wanted to say. So if anybody's got any questions for me, happy to try and answer those for you.
Fabulous. Thank you very much, Tracy, for your report. It's very detailed, and there's lots of good numbers and stats in there that we can go through as a committee. just before we go to Councillor Anderson, I remember having this last year, and waste management was, I think, #1 then as well. So that's a regular, with repairs probably being second. So we'll talk about that, but I'll go to Councillor Anderson first.
Councillor Massey's just mentioned last year's report, and I'm going to two, because I recall last year's report saw a 10% increase in complaints. So we've got a 13% increase here, and I've just looked up the last report. Last year, or rather 24 months ago, we had 1,562 complaints. We've gone up to 1,940. That's a near quarter increase, which seems quite significant over just a couple of years. Have you got any sort of ideas or an opinion as to why that is? Do you guys in your team make a judgment as to whether we are service has gone down, or perhaps it's a case, a cultural thing, people feel more able to complain, maybe we've changed the process which makes it easier to complain? Just for example, why have we seen a near quarter increase in 24 months?
My own personal opinion on this, Councillor, is obviously we are in intervention. As a result of the intervention, we've made various policy changes. Waste having significant changes. I know this is a 23-24 report, but there was communication about the forthcoming changes and everything else. Obviously, we've got big financial constraints. There's been a lot of negative publicity about the council, and I think that all contributes to, perhaps people complaining a little bit more about what they're getting and whether they think they're getting value for money, etc. So that's my own personal view. We do, certainly within the contact centre, we don't discourage people from making complaints, because obviously complaints are valuable to us from a learning perspective and trying to improve our services. So if somebody does want to make a complaint, we will log that for them on their behalf. We've put an online form on the website now for complaints, etc. So I think it's probably a mixture of things. Waste has always been the highest area, as far as I can remember from working at the council. And residents do get very passionate about their waste collections, as I'm sure you're all aware when you're out and about. So, I think there's just been so many changes. We did have issues with the waste service last year. Now we've changed the policy. We're doing the fortnightly collections. There's charges for garden waste subscriptions. So there's been a lot of change. I will say that I'm starting to notice within the contact centre a drop in the number of miscollection calls that are coming through. So I do think it's starting to settle down a little bit now. But that would be my view on the changes.
Thank you for that. And when it comes to the learning process, you briefly mentioned it there. We must learn from our complaints, etc. And that's correct. What is the our process for learning at the moment? Do you just hand over the complaints to a service area and say, look, residents are complaining about X, Y, and Z, do something about it? Or do you guys do any kind of exercise where you look at data and make suggestions? Who ultimately is responsible for the learning?
Thank you, Councillor. The service area are responsible for coming up with the learning, and the complaints team really act as coordinators for the complaints process. So the complaints will go into the corporate complaints team, and then they will assign the complaint to the appropriate service. So it's the service that's responsible for compiling the complaints. What I want to do now, that's come under my area, is try and increase the quality checking, those types of things, do a lot more analysis on the complaints, and really, try and improve the processes. In my opinion, I don't think we should have complaints that go out of date. I don't think we should have any that go out of date. The same with members' inquiries. So I think now I'd like to bring it in line with some of my other customer services teams and the quality processes that we have in place for that, and try and make improvements. But as far as learning, that is down to the service area. But I'd like to pick up on some of those themes and then see if we can support facilitation of some process improvements, etc. And I'm within corporate services, work closely with our Chief Digital Officer. So of course we're always looking at automation opportunities. We are actually in the process of putting in a new system for freedom of information and complaints. It's called Information, which has a lot more effective reporting and also chasing, automatic chasing, etc. So very quickly we're in the overall area of complaints monitoring. Thank you.
Thank you for that. And just finally, out of interest, how is a complaint, who and how is a complaint defined by when it comes through members' inquiries? So what I mean by that is, if we get an email from a resident who is rather angry and says it's an outrage, my bins haven't been collected, I'm disgusted, you need to sort this out, and we fire it through, I suspect that will be picked up as a complaint. If email comes through that's just noting, you know, councillor, by the way, my bins weren't collected this morning, just for your information, they're saying the same thing, but it's not sort of worded really complainy. So would one be considered a complaint and another not?
This is something, I'm glad you've raised this actually, because this is something that I'm really keen to sort of bottom out, because what I've established so far when reviewing members' inquiries that come through, some of them are initial requests, a lot of them are actual complaints, and they're then getting referred into the complaints process. So this is one of the reasons why I want to have this group with members, because I want to look at ways of speeding up that process, because if you're having to wait a period of 10 working days for a response to something that actually could just be a very basic service request, and then the service area waiting 10 days to actually respond to you, that's a waste of your time. You're then having to diarise it to make sure you're getting a response. So that's something that I'm really keen to look at when we have the working group with the members, because it may be that we can triage out those things immediately as the request comes in, to avoid the delays in handling that. The local government and social care ombudsman and the housing ombudsman have clear guidelines about what they define as a complaint, which is usually about the dissatisfaction with a service or where they've requested something and it's not actually happened. So I know that if the complaints team, for example, got a members' inquiry and that had been raised once or twice before, nothing's actually happened, they then would move that into the complaints process. But again, that needs to happen promptly, because otherwise you're waiting. If it's not dealt with immediately by the service area and then it then gets moved as a complaint, it's you know, making that process a lot longer for you. So I think there's definite opportunity to make real improvements in that. Definitely. Thank you. Does that answer your question? Thank you.
Councillor Cockshaw, then Councillor Howell.
Thank you, Chair. No, Councillor Anderson's point stands. I had a resident contact me just saying that I've had an issue with the service, and it was very simple. The service immediately put their hands up to apologise, but it'd been handed then to the complaints team, and it then went through the whole formal complaints team. The poor resident at the end went, look, I didn't want any of this to happen. I just wanted it. It was very simple. Could have been done very quickly, but it is that point of where does it balance to? And sometimes they are requests for information, members' inquiries. Some of mine have been, can you tell me this? And it's then gone through the 10 working days for a response, but it then goes through, is there a particular issue? The system is very antiquated perhaps is the best way to say it. And I know I raise it mainly because in 2022 I remember meeting with a cabinet member and officers, and we were being told that the council had brought in a casework management system for councillors, and it was about to be trialled and it was going to be introduced. I've been a caseworker, I've worked for members of parliament, we've got a casework management team, app software to do that, and we see it was coming in, haven't seen it. I know it's not quite in the purview of the report, but it's something really important for members at least, because some people will run it on their own spreadsheets or some people use their email accounts. It all feeds into it, and it becomes very hard for members to, as well, to respond to complaints or work with officers to actually resolve some things. So it's really just put it on the radar, just flagging that for the working group, and that where those things have been said before. But I think there is a point of, Councillor Anderson says that complaints have gone up slightly. I would say that still, I'd rather the council know about this stuff. I'd rather we be open, accessible to actually have that. And I know from past times where some of the digitalisation efforts where people would ring the contact centre and they would say, I can't tell you that, sorry, I've got to email someone. And they'd have to email someone again, and you lose it. It's more efforts of, as much as complaints going on, how is digitalisation within the contact centre working? Is that actually helping resolve complaints quicker, or is that have you seen that perhaps work, or is there a little bit work to go as we do digitalise?
Just in response to your first point about the members app, etc., the new system that we have just purchased, information, and we're actually going live with the Freedom of Information on Monday, also has a part of it for members' inquiries. Now, because we're doing the working group, I didn't just want to assume that we will use information for the members' inquiries, because I think it's really important that you're all engaged in the process. I do know that Croydon use the app. There's a members' app. So basically you would log your inquiry onto the app, and then obviously can track, and you can go on there to check updates. And we have requested a meeting with Croydon to see how it's working for them. And when we have the working group, I'll be able to bring that feedback to that working group. So we have got big plans to really improve this for you. And I'm really pleased, because obviously it's come under my area now, and I can look at it with a fresh pair of eyes. We've got a lot of digital change that's going on at the moment. We're looking at voice AI, which will be implemented in the very near future. We're looking at robotic process automation, which we're using for various things, and CRM. So it may not be one size fits all. It might be that the process that we actually come up with sort of dips into all of those things. But the most important thing, I think, is to remove the bureaucracy. I think what's happened with complaints is that, with members rather, inquiries, they've sort of got dragged into the bureaucracy of the complaints process, like the 10 working days, when actually there isn't specific legislation that you have to have for the members' inquiries. So I think it's a case of just looking at it with a fresh pair of eyes, finding out where the issues really are for you, and just trying to make the process work. And if that means using a bit of this and a bit of that and a bit of triaging, then that's what we'll do. But I really do believe that we can make big improvements in that for you. And just being copied into some of the inquiries since I attended the ONS, I can really see where the frustration comes in. You know, I had an example the other day where a member waited 10 days to get the reply, and then when they got the reply, it just told them they needed to log it somewhere else. And, you know, if I was on the receiving end of that, I wouldn't be happy. So it is really useful getting that feedback, and I think, you know, we can really do something with that group. So thank you.
Just go on separately in the report, going to the, thank you for that, actually. I should say that that's reassuring to see, actually, that we're trying. I know there is not one size fits all, but actually some improvement for some members who go for me. I'll scroll through my inbox and for responses. It's difficult. So it is. I think there's need happily to have that conversation now. It's happening. I'm pleased. At least there's a working group and things are going ahead. Just going on to the some of the ombudsman stage 1 complaints. I'm just looking at the benchmarking. What made us pick Redbridge? Are we picking to just because it's nearby, or is it sit for? Or it's difficult if we're trying to compare ourselves to other local authorities. I wasn't sure just the rationale.
To be perfectly honest with you, Councillor, I wish I'd taken that out, because what happened, the team actually went out to various local authorities for information, and nobody replied apart from Redbridge. So it doesn't really give an appropriate comparison. So in future, if we don't get sufficient number of responses, we won't include that anymore, because I totally agree with you. So thank you.
Thank you. I just wasn't sure on how what the rationale was. So if we haven't got the data, it's hard to present what that actually delivers for anyone.
Yes, I agree.
Just before I go to Councillor Howell, I completely agree. I couldn't understand why it was there. The numbers were so different. So, yeah, but if we don't get the data, you know, we can't do that. Councillor Howell.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, in the past, or recently, I've heard some members say that in the past they've not been happy with members' inquiries. So being open, how do we, hopefully it will never happen, but hopefully, how do we put a complaint in about members' inquiries? Is there a process for that?
Well, you can certainly inform me, Councillor, if you have a complaint with the process. I think, to be honest with you, I'm happy to, and I think you did have one the other day, actually, where you were waiting for a response. And I think, actually, the example I've just given, a planning inquiry, was the one that you actually had. So I'm more than happy to be, if you feel the service has fallen short in any way, obviously, I only manage the team that coordinate the responses, but as I'm being made aware of situations where responses aren't being given within timeframes, etc., I am escalating that within the services. So I am happy to be made aware of any issues that you have with the process, because that's how we're going to learn from it and make improvements to it. So hopefully that's helpful.
Yeah, I wasn't being negative. I was just saying that other members have brought this up in the past. And I believe it was mentioned at the, the meeting you was at before. Sorry, I forgot what it's called. Also, what was mentioned there was, in the past, it's been 7 working days. Is that to be aimed for again, or?
I don't know the reason, to be totally honest with you. I don't, because I've only just taken over the service, I don't know the reason why the number of working days was changed. The only thing I can assume is that it was maybe to bring it in line with the complaints process. I think that's something that we need to discuss at the working group, and I think, you know, looking at whether we can potentially triage some of those inquiries that come through, we might be able to review the number of days that we're taking. But I do agree, it does seem a substantial period when you're waiting to get back to residents, etc. So we definitely, that is on the list for review at the working group.
Thank you for that. I think it's important to note, as important as waste is, and it's obviously number one again, and councillors, if we agree, we can ask someone in relation to waste to come along to a future meeting and maybe explain how they're trying to improve the service, which might be with the gift of this committee to do so. So bear that in mind. But I think it's also important and very important, children's social care and adult social care, the number of compliments far outweigh the number of complaints, which is exactly what I would hope would be the results there. It's really good to see. I think the report you've given us is really clear. The use of the graphs makes it really easy for us to be able to digest a lot of numbers and statistics. And yeah, as you can tell, there's a lot of good work going on. And I echo some of the other comments of members in terms of we've all had an inquiry dragged into a complaint almost, and a lot of the time it is down to timescales because we're being chased and we're chasing, and then you might not get one. Or the worst thing is you wait 10 days and then get asked to fill out a form, which frustrates everybody in the process. So I'm sure we've all been there, so we welcome this working group as well to try and bring some improvements to that. Not with waste is obviously like number one. Number two is repairs again. I've seen some contractors the council works with noted in some of the how do the complaints that go on this authority then get pushed back to these third-party contractors that are carrying out work on behalf of the authority?
It would be unfair of me to comment too much because obviously I don't know the detail within the service areas, but obviously they would have contract management within the teams and escalate it that way. More than happy to, if you've got any specific questions about those areas, to go away and get responses from those areas for you. But I guess it would just be under their contract management process that they have with MERS, etc.
No, I appreciate that. So if a complaint goes into the council, then it goes to MERS, I suppose it's what's the process where the council find out the resolution of the complaint and if the complainant's been needs have been addressed?
Well, it's the service area's responsibility to get the response from MERS, etc., to then inform us so that the complaint still sits within our corporate complaints process. So they would just liaise with the supplier at that point and then get the information to feed back into the corporate complaint.
Thank you. And is that internally, that information flown as good as it could, or could you see potentially any improvements could be put into that part of the system?
Sorry, I've taken it off. It's probably too soon for me to comment at this stage. The service is very new to me. Obviously, I am doing a lot of analysis at the moment, looking at all the different processes. We've done some process mapping work already, so I do tend to review the whole end-to-end process. Complaints is a little bit different because we do have to align with the governance processes set by the Housing Ombudsman and the local government ombudsman as well. So we do have to adhere to that. But as far as our internal processes, then I'm open to looking at the whole thing and seeing if we can make any improvements in any areas, Councillor.
No, I appreciate it. I mean, waste is obviously more internally in the council when we're not relying on third parties, so I know it's hard to comment, but I thought it was important to bring up as it was second in a number of complaints. So yeah, we're being asked to note this. Has anyone got any other comments or questions before we move? Oh, Councillor Harrell.
Sorry, just one more, I just thought of it. I live myself in social housing, so if I want to put a issue in about where I live, what's the process for it, please? Because I shouldn't really do it as a councillor, I don't believe. So should I do it as a resident, or how does that work, please?
So for your own personal, I'm not... Perhaps Dan could support me on that one because I'm not 100% on the answer to that one, whether it's you just raise it as a normal complaint.
I can assure you as a councillor you don't lose any rights as a resident. So I think the best way to do it is just to be clear about the status in which, so if you live at 10 Acacia Avenue and you say I've got a problem with a leaking tap or whatever, and it hasn't been resolved, you put that in, but you may want to say for transparency, I'm also a councillor, but want to make it absolutely clear I'm asking as a resident of this borough. And I think that's probably the best way to do it. Is that okay? Yeah. Right.
Thanks, Dan.
Councillor Okiki.
Yeah, I'm looking at the adult social care complaints and compliments. And it seems in 2023 we had more of compliments than complaints, which is a very positive. However, I haven't seen like children's social care where you have the compliments and complaints to kind of evidence how the services is working. In terms of members' inquiries, being a councillor, I have not had any issues with members' inquiries. I had a positive experience using it, so that's a compliment for me.
Thank you. That's very, very nice. We'll add that to our number of compliments, I think. No, thanks for that. And I'll certainly take on board that feedback about the children's social care comparison. The next report that will be due will be the mid-year report, which will be at this committee in January. So we can have a look at that for you. Thank you.
Any other member with comments or questions on this agenda item before we move to the recommendations? So the recommendations, I believe the first one's more for Cabinet than us, but the second one is that the Audit Committee consider and note this report. Are we all agreed? Agreed. Thank you. And that brings us on to item 9. Which is the 2023/24 Annual Internal Audit Report plus Head of Internal Audit Opinion. Can I please ask Frankie Smith to present this item, please?
Thank you, Chair. So we are required by the Public Sector Internal Audit Standards to provide an annual audit opinion and an annual report. The opinion is derived from the work that we completed within the year, so for 23/24. And it also encompasses the follow-up work that we've done on management actions that have been agreed. We should also include or consider other sources of assurance provided to the Council during that time. You'll note that the opinion within the report currently is that there is limited assurance that can be placed on the adequacy of the Council's risk management, governance and internal control arrangements. What I should say at this point is actually there is a positive improvement from previous years. In most recent years, we've not been able to give an opinion, or we've given no assurance. And there is lots of promising improvement, particularly around risk management and governance, especially in the latter end of 2023/24. So I think this is a positive uptake of the opinion. The work that we've completed in the year is comprised of both consultancy and assurance work, so it's a combination of two types of work. And the report also acknowledges that we've had very positive engagement from auditees and our clients during the year. I can confirm that all of the work that we've completed in the year has been completed within our audit manual and in line with the Public Sector Internal Audit Standards, and all of our work's been completed with absolute independence and objectivity, and there's been no undue influence from officers, members or anybody else. The opinion states a number of matters which should be incorporated into the 23/24 annual governance statement. One of the points to note to members is that I do, as Head of Internal Audit, do have wider responsibilities out of internal audit. This includes risk management and insurance, but for the period of 23/24 there's been no conflict and this hasn't impeded my opinion. The report refers to the Quality Assurance and Improvement Programme. This is something that we're required to have as part of the internal audit and public sector standards. There are some areas of that Quality Assurance and Improvement Programme that are currently not embedded within our practice, and that's something that we'll be developing and embedding within the coming year, within the rest of the year. So, for example, making sure that we're consistently obtaining customer satisfaction questionnaires on all the work that we complete, and making sure that we're implementing and then tracking key performance indicators to monitor the audit delivery and the quality of the work. The report includes 12 assurance review summaries and 4 consultancy review summaries. You'll note that there's a mix of substantial assurance opinions and several some assurance opinions, which are all very positive. I'm keen to get members' feedback on the level of detail that we've included in the report. You've just had a a dashboard for each paper each report that we've finalised. Full reports can be provided to members on request. If there are any questions on the individual summaries this evening, I may need to take that back to the team. Unfortunately, I wasn't here for some of the work completed, but I'm happy to take questions back and report back to members separately. The audit paper also provides an update on where we are with progress against the 23-24 plan. And I'm pleased to confirm to members that since we've written this paper, we've since finalised 3 further pieces of work. That's out-of-borough placements, unregistered placements, and children's services aftercare managing cash. Those summaries will be presented to members in the January progress report. And I've since agreed with Councillor Massey that we'll be presenting periodic updates to members outside of committee on email, and the next one will follow in due course after this meeting, so I can provide an update on those individual papers as well. And I'm currently today finalising the piece of work on major projects. The report also covers off all of the follow-up work that we've done. So in previous meetings, there's been a lot of outstanding actions that haven't been followed up. We didn't have a consistent follow-up process in place. We've since done a lot of activity around that. My colleague Barry Hatton's predominantly done that work. And I'm pleased to note that all the historic work has now been followed up, and there's no issues to raise with members. And moving forward, we're going to introduce a consistent follow-up process so that we're following up agreed management actions as they fall due. In terms of the audit resource, so we are currently recruiting to the team. We currently have some vacancies. There are 2 auditors in post that are on a permanent basis, and they're stepping up remarkably and acting outside of their role to support me in current times, and they've been providing invaluable support. I'm pleased to note that one of our auditors, Pravesh Mann, has recently secured the Certified Information Systems Auditor qualification, which is very hard to achieve. He's done that in his own time, his own funding, but it will be a great support to us as a council, and I'm keen to support his onward progression. And in terms of our vacancies and the work that we're doing to address those, so we've, since the last paper that we presented in July, our audit managers moved on to another council for career progression. So we're currently recruiting to 3 vacant posts. I'm using a hybrid model of recruitment. We've got agency staff coming in. We've got contract auditor that I've used before to come in on a 6-month basis. And we're also doing permanent recruitment. We're interviewing this week for that. So we're looking at different options to try and mitigate some of the risk. We have also, I'm in discussion with procurement to arrange a call-off contract so that we call on contract agency staff through an agency firm to provide us with a bit more resilience. I think that was it for the time being. I'd just like to close the item by thanking Barry Hatton and Pravesh Mann, my auditors, for keeping the audit work going. They've been impeccable in the last 6 months since I've been with the council, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much, Frankie, for your report. Yes, I think there's lots of positives in terms of where it is. I know, especially from where we've come from, and it's good to know that we're still wanting to bring new members onto the team to bolster and reinforce the audit team, because I think that's going to be really key to sustaining this and improving it going forward. Councillor Cottrell, did you want to start questions or comments?
No, thank you, Chair. No, thank you, Frankie. Just responding really to your about some of the feedback on how it's presented. I think it's really easy to read. I think done really well actually presenting it in the way it is, taking stuff off the dashboard. So it doesn't overload me, but I get enough assurance, know what I'm seeing. So it's more so just as a compliment to you and your team, really. I think it's really well presented. It's easy to read and understand, which is, I think, what many of us councillors often ask for reports. We want to be able to feel like we've got enough information, but not be able to read it without having to sit there, having to Google everything, or try and ask more probing questions. I'm quite happy with how you present it. I think it's really well done.
Councillor Anderson?
Thank you for the report. You mentioned we're looking to obviously recruit a few people. The audit, was it the audit manager has relatively recently only moved on to. I may be totally mistaken here, but I thought I remembered at the audit training that you provided quite a while ago at the beginning of this municipal year for members, which thank you was a good session. I thought you mentioned you were looking to recruit a couple back then, which, given obviously you mentioned it back then, suggests it's been quite a while, and obviously you've said you get people in on contract agency stuff. Is the environment for recruiting auditors at the moment a really difficult one? Are we struggling to recruit?
Thank you. So internal audit auditors are difficult to recruit at the moment. I'm pleased to confirm that since we have met in June for that training, we have managed to secure an agency member of staff. So they're with us for a period of 3 to 6 months, depending on how we get on. And I've also managed to secure somebody. He's not ready to join us yet, but he's worth waiting for. I've worked with him before. So we're waiting. He's coming to join us in November. So there has been recruitment activity since we met, but we haven't had necessarily the people in to start with us yet. The permanent recruitment has happened as quickly as I could manifest that. So that we decided over August, so we went for advert in August and we decided to leave the advert open for a reasonable period of time to capture as much interest as possible. So we could have done it for a shorter period, but I wanted to give candidates sufficient time. So I didn't want to rush. So that might end up being a mistake on my part, but I wanted to take time and get as many good candidates through as possible. So the aim is to try and get as many candidates interviewed and then hopefully selected and appointed by the end of the calendar year. And in the meantime, we'll use other sources of resourcing to fill the audit plan gaps.
Okay, thank you for that. My follow-up question was going to be when would we be anticipating to get those permanent people in, but you've answered that. So just to say, I agree with the previous councillor's comments. Thank you for the dashboard. I like it. You specifically asked for feedback. I think it's good. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Yeah, I agree. I think the layout's really good. A lot of the reports have been really well laid out this evening, which is really good for us because it is a chunky agenda, but it's made it a lot easier to digest. Yes, I'm pleased to see we're still trying to recruit. I just want to add a bit more information for Councillor Anderson. In my communication with other chairs of audit across the South East, it's definitely not just Thurrock. It's a much more national and private and public sector when it comes to recruitment in audit. So yeah, but it's nothing personal to Thurrock as such. It is definitely something that sort of goes a bit further afield. Any other comments or questions from members? Councillor Panjala.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for the report. I would like to discuss about Appendix A, about your role. And I know without team, we can't able to deliver our targets, whatever we set up. So I'm very sad to see about the chart, this one, because you are the head, but you don't have enough team members. And like if you see internal audit manager, senior auditor, and internal auditor, 3 members, altogether 5 vacant roles are there. As you said, we temporarily had the one person from the agency. Do we have any facility to recruit directly, because this is a audit department is like a more critical, important role? Why don't we recruit do we have any mechanism to recruit directly instead of depending on the agencies?
Thank you, Councillor. Yes, so absolutely, my preference would be to 100% recruit permanently. At the moment, the market isn't favourable, so we're not getting the number of candidates through to be able to appoint to all of the roles. So I've decided that the best way forward is to have a mixed resourcing model where we have some permanent and some temporary, but not temporary staff that we're just taking from an agency. So I've direct approached contract auditors that I've used before, one-man bands who work well and deliver the work that we can bring in through our agency arrangement. And the idea is that we're not then reliant on only permanent staff or only agency. We've got a mix of both. What I should say is the council was very, very supportive of us recruiting permanently. So I'm speaking to my manager, the 151 officer, about the different options, and there's full support there. So the budget isn't an issue. It's literally the market situation. What we're doing as a backstop to that is I'm in discussion with a couple of agency firms, contract firms, where we can go to them and we have a call-off contract where I can say, I've got 5 audits this year, can you come and support us? So we're just having to think a bit more laterally about how we resource the team, but my preference would always be permanent, because I think that lands better with the clients and the council, and also team cohesiveness is really important to me, and you get better team dynamic with permanent appointments. But the temporary people that I've recruited have actually integrated really well into the team. So at the moment, we're just having to be a bit more flexible about how we recruit. But the idea is that we build a position where we can have permanent. We may have to think longer term about bringing in apprentices and growing our own. At the moment, I'd rather have experienced auditors just to deliver the quality of the work.
Thank you for your answer. Do we have any deadline to recruit the staff so that we can able to work on that one deadlines?
So only in the sense of that we need to deliver the audit plan. So obviously we've got to deliver the 24-25 audit plan in time to do the annual opinion. So the annual opinion will come to this committee in July. So usually that gives us until mid-May to deliver the plan. So I'm working, so at the moment we've got somebody joining us in November. Hopefully they'll be able to do 8 to 10 audits, working with another firm. I'm reluctant to say in a public meeting which firm, but we're working with the firm to try and resource, and they've already agreed to do 2 to 3 audits. So there is a deadline we're working to. It's some way in the distance. I'm keeping the Section 151 up to speed with where we are with delivery. I've had some liaison with Councillor Massey, and I will be doing monthly updates to members, this committee members, in terms of where we are with the plan. So you'll hopefully see in between meetings if there's any drift on audit plan delivery.
Thank you, Officer.
Yes, when this committee agreed the schedule, we asked for regular updates, and that's what we're going to get, which is great. It's exactly what we need to make sure that we don't have drift, as you say. I find it reassuring to know that it says in the report, and I think you touched on it at the start of presenting, that you've had no issues at all and complete open access to any of officers or members that you've needed to carry out this audits. And a lot of when we look at the areas for development, they're really detailed, which I think is really good and clear. There's no sort of bland answers here. It actually sets out very clearly in almost bullet points, if they were there. These are the things that would improve this, and I think that's really good to see. So yeah, it's a good quality, and a lot of them have got already substantial audit opinion, which as an audit committee, that's one of the main things we're looking for. I know some of them have slipped and some have been deferred. We'd all, like many other audit departments and committees around all local authorities, probably in the UK, like more resource when it comes to these things. So hopefully there'll be someone out there watching this live or maybe on the council's website that thinks, oh, that's just the job for me. So I'd urge them to get in contact. Any other member with comments or questions on this one? We have got some various, so I'll just touch on the recommendations before I read them formally. We've noted it, I think that would be agreed. We've also looked at areas for improvement, and we've noted the source of independent assurance regarding the risk. I think that's been really good to hear, that the whole team have been able to have unfettered access to everything they've needed to. So I'll go to the recommendations if anyone's not got any further questions or comment. No. Recommendation 1.1, the Audit Committee note the internal audit engagement summary reports for the period of 1st of March 2024 to the 26th of July 2024. Are we noting those? Agreed? Agreed, thank you. 1.2, the Audit Committee to note the areas for improvement identified in relation to the Council's internal audit and risk management arrangements for inclusion in the 2023/24 annual governance statement and the proposed mechanisms for monitoring, tracking and reporting on implementation progress to key stakeholders. Are we all agreed? And I'll make sure that is communicated throughout the committee. 1.3, that the Audit Committee note and report as a source of independent assurance regarding the risk, internal control and governance arrangements across the Council, noting that the outcomes from 2023/24 internal audit plan and the resultant limited opinion to the annual governance status. We all agreed? Agreed. Thank you very much. As we've already taken item 10 earlier, we're going to be moving on to item 11, which is found as a loose report pack that you should have received an electronic copy of and you have a hard copy this evening. This is the Annual Information Governance Report, April 2023 through to March 2024. And yeah, can I please ask Rachel Steele to present this report?
Hello, good evening. This is my first time here, so hoping you'll be nice. Obviously you've seen the report and the figures, so I won't go through them one at a time. But what we'll note from the report is that the volumes of freedom of information requests and subject access requests have gone up. Generally, the requests are becoming more complex and a lot longer and more detailed to answer. You'll note from the report that there were some high volume of missed finance requests. That was due mainly to the current climate of our finances at the council. And we did receive high volumes of finance complaints, and at the time finance didn't have answering FRA requests as their priority. They had obviously to balance the books, etc. So FOIs were put on a back burner at that time, which we understood. We get the usual areas of high volumes, so social care, housing and education. We work regularly with services to publish data sets to try and reduce the number of requests we have to respond to. We look at trends, etc., and then work with them as to what sets they can put online to try and reduce the number that they receive and have to answer, and obviously reduce the burden of responding. As Tracy has already mentioned, we have got a new system coming in on Monday, which we're very keen to have. It will reduce the manual processes that we have in place at the moment. We have a high amount of sort of internal manual processes, and the system will enable for a lot more consistency with responses, so we're keen to move that forward. Moving on to subject access requests, the volumes have gone up again from last year. We are seeing a really big increase in large social care complex cases. They are unfortunately almost impossible to meet on time because they could have 20 years worth of records, and we actually only get, even with an extension, 3 months to reply. And when you're looking at thousands and thousands of pages that need reading and redacting, it's just not possible. What we do to ensure the customer is happy is we release phased disclosures. So we release data on a regular basis at an expectation of we communicate with them, we advise them when we're going to send data, and we stick to a regular pattern. They can't read 20,000 pages any quicker than we can, so we're releasing it in stages that enables them to be able to read it in stages and then come back to us if they've got any queries or questions on the bit that they've received so far. So although that shows that we miss those requests, generally the public are quite happy to receive it in phased disclosures. So moving on to the ROPA, there's ongoing entry reviews that happen yearly. Those responsibilities haven't changed. We're continuing to work towards getting as many of those complete as possible. It's an ongoing project. We do it every year. And then the records, work is continuing to reduce the records that we have in paper and electronic and ensuring we do meet retention guidelines. The challenges for us really are sheer volumes. I think the positives are, even though the figures are going up each year, our performance still remains quite high. And we're quite pleased with it. So open to questions.
Thank you very much, Rachel, for your report. Yes, I've got I've got quite a few questions, I suppose, in terms of, yes, it has jumped up a lot in terms of the SAR requests, and I can imagine if you're going through various different systems, whether it's on paper or electronic, and you've got to pull together years and years worth of information, that is going to take some time. 89%, it's only dropped by 2% in terms of that, but obviously the percentage going up is a lot higher than that. I'll open up to members of the committee for questions or comments, and then I'll mop up, if that's okay. Anyone with comments or questions on this agenda? Councillor Coxall, then Councillor Harrell.
Thank you, Chair. Just going to records management, really. I know we're under the effort to digitalise as much as possible. I can imagine we've got years and years worth of documentation either here or off-site. How is that process going? I know, I can imagine it, I think the report mentions it's up 50% is still outstanding for our on-site archive, and off-site is minimal. I'm just gauging, have we got enough resources to actually try and get a good electronic copy of what we need and dispose of what we don't?
If I'm honest, no, I don't feel like we have got the right resource. At the moment, the records manager is assisting with the SharePoint project, and that's really important because having a new place to put data and recording it accurately is important, and to have that set up will enable us to move the data from our old legacy system Objective, and there's a need to move over only what we need so that we're not keeping old stuff that we've got for too long, obviously meeting our retention. So unfortunately they all have a knock-on effect on each other, and the main resource for that is the one person at the moment. We did have an additional team member that was made redundant as part of the work to reduce, obviously, expenditure. So it's having a bit of a knock-on effect at the moment. The archived and the boxes, etc., will take a back step while we get the digitalisation correct. When that's done, they'll all move along slowly in the right direction. So we know it's an issue and it's something that's being worked on, but the priority's got to be to get the digital records right, and then we can look at the older stuff that's off-site and moving it in. Does that help?
Sorry, Councillor Harrell, just because my question literally backs off on the end of that. I mean, I noticed that it's nice to see in 7.4 on page 6 of the report, it's got the risk that the National Archives could fail us in archival requirements and then take the data and process it on our behalf and charge us as they see fit for the privilege. And as we were discussing tonight, risk, that's really sobering to see that in there, but that's obviously a real thing that could potentially happen if we don't get it all into electronic. And we've nearly 10,000 boxes out there outside of the council building. That's a lot to do. But Councillor Harrell.
Thanks, Chair. First of all, going back to your answer to Councillor Coxall, sorry, I nearly forgot your name. I shouldn't do, he beat me 2 years ago. Anyway, thank you for being honest. That's the main thing. It's really good that you feel that you can be open about it, because obviously we need to be more open as a council. So it's really nice that you said that at a meeting. My question was, freedom of information. It seems to have gone up a lot this year, 23-24, to 1,116 number of requests from 920 last year. Can you explain why that might be, please?
I think in general, people are becoming more aware of their rights to ask for data. And I also believe that a lot of our increase last year was due to our financial position. People were asking a lot of questions that they wouldn't they might think of, but not bother to raise. And we did see a big increase, and I genuinely believe that that's the reason. We get a lot of requests from journalists. Sometimes it's not clear they're a journalist, because unless they tell us, we don't necessarily know. And I think the appetite of people just asking more and wanting to know more has increased our requests.
Councillor Kiki.
Thank you, Chair. Looking at on page 7, we have FOIs received, housing 120, children's services 110. So who are those requesting for, which category of people are requesting? Is it from public or individuals for children's services? And what areas are they requesting for information? What is it regarding, if you have an idea? Sorry.
Novice. I don't have statistics to hand for that. I don't know exactly the types of people request for children's services. I can get the information because the system allows me to pull that out. It doesn't form part of the report. We do get a lot of requests that I've seen from sort of children's bodies, people advocating for the improvements to children's services. So we do get a lot of detailed, long requests around children. They might want to know how much the home is costing on average, how much we're paying monthly, or it might be what are our policies on this, what are our procedures on that. So I do know that a lot do come from like organisations like children's charities, etc., that are trying to gain like a bigger picture across the country. And they're quite often, we manage information governance services for another council at the same time, and we see a lot of those requests across both councils. So they're usually sort of campaigns or something to that degree. But I can get you a specific answer if you'd like me to feedback later, but I don't have the exact figures to hand.
Thank you, Councillor. Any other councillor? I've got one quick question. On 2.3.10, page 4, by instance that the council reported to the Information Commissioner's Office, the ICO, about a leaked photograph. What is that a closed case, and has there been any recommendations from the ICO put forward?
I believe we reported it to the Information Commissioner, and the recommendations were that we needed to look at our processes and procedures. Unfortunately, I know specifically about this incident, and it wasn't data that we could prove was leaked by the council in any way. So in essence, someone took a screenshot, and the data was leaked in that way. So we weren't able to prove or disprove, even using other investigative techniques that we're able to use to prove how that information was leaked. So the Information Commissioner was around, suggestion was around improving our processes, but also understood that in this occasion, there's not a lot we can do apart from banning the use of phones, which obviously we're not able to do. People have got their freedom. So yeah, that was the detail around that one. Does that help?
Yeah, that is helpful. It's really hard to stop someone taking a screenshot, whether it's of a computer screen or a mobile phone or whatever it's going to be. So yeah, at least we've looked to see if there was any lessons we could learn. I think that's the important thing, and sometimes there just isn't. But at least we've gone through that process and come to that conclusion. And I think you were correct on what you touched on earlier. In this data-driven age, people are a lot more informed about their rights to have their data correct, up to date, and obviously erased if they feel there's a reason for it. So I think it is expected, and probably other local authorities are seeing a similar rise, I would have thought as well. I mean, I think this report's good for us to come here, and it's really important that we give it the correct time and respect it deserves, because it is, a lot of the time these requests are coming in when someone's obviously wanting information on their own history or casework and things like that. And just touching on what we went on earlier, I think it's so important that we get it digitalised. It's vital, because I can't imagine how hard it is sometimes to get some of this information to people in the right time frame when it could be in multiple locations and in multiple formats. Any other questions or comments from members before we go to the... We've only got a recommendation, but to note this, there is no actual recommendation as such. And the recommendation, 1.2, the Audit Committee to note the information, governance activity and performance report. Have we all agreed that we've done that? Agreed? Brilliant, thank you very much. I believe we are now coming on to item 12, which is the work programme. Do any members wish to comment on the work programme? I can't see that anyone's raising their hands for this. We have got a meeting obviously in January, 9th of January, with not as many items on it at the moment as we've had this evening. We may, based on what we were talking about earlier in terms of getting things before the backstop, might have to have an extra meeting before then. And Councillor Anderson?
I don't know if you want to do it this municipal year, but you mentioned about getting someone in from the waste service to talk about complaints.
That's just what I was leading on to. So yes, if we have potentially got a meeting in January where, if that's enough time to maybe have at least a verbal update and maybe a written report on what the service is doing in terms of improving on the complaints from last year to this year and the plans they've got to improve it going forward. How do members feel about that? Does anyone like to comment other than Councillor Anderson on the idea? Councillor Howell?
Well, apart from agreeing, I think it's a good idea to get someone in here from waste. Because if they're top of the list, then they need to be able to account, don't they? So, and explain why it is so high.
Yeah, I think it's fair. I mean, like I say, they've been top of the list all the time that I've been around the Audit Committee. So if council would like that added to the work programme, please, in terms of hopefully for the January meeting, if not after. If you let me know how that will go. Anything else that members would like to comment on the work programme? No, I think we're going to have a busy time over the next few months as it is. So I'd like to thank all the officers for their reports, all the members for their contributions and attendance this evening. Thank you very much, everyone. And that concludes the business of the meeting this evening. I now declare the meeting closed at 9:07 p.m. Thank you very much.